Alright, in this video we're going to talk about matrix operations some more, and we're going to talk specifically about how to multiply two matrices together. Okay, so here's the first thing we're going to look at. We're going to look at the dimensions of the two matrices we're trying to multiply, because those are going to be really important for how we do this, right? So I have a 2 by 2 in the first one, right? Two rows, two columns, and a 2 by 2 in the next one. So what I want to notice is I have a 2 and a 2 for my columns and rows, right? So because those two match, that tells me I can multiply them together, okay? If they don't match, I cannot multiply them together. Then I'm going to take the rows and the columns, and that is going to be the dimensions for my new one. So my new matrix that I get when I multiply this out is going to be a 2 by 2. This one's pretty simple because it's all 2's, but here in a minute you'll see some examples where doing this step is going to be exceptionally helpful, okay? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take the first row, right, the 5 and the -3, and multiply it to the -1 and the 4. So I have 5 times -1. I'm going to do that one first, and then the -3 times 4. All right, so here's what that's going to look like. I'm going to have -5, and I'm going to plus -12, right? Because 5 times -1 is -5, -3 times 4 is -12. Okay, I'm going to follow this same pattern all the way through. So now I'm going to use the first row in the second column, and what I'm going to get here is 40 plus 6. So now I'm going to go down to the second row in the first column. So 3 times -1 is -3. -6 times 4 is -24. So that is going to be -3 plus -24. And then finally, I'm going to do the second row in the second column, right? And that is going to be 3 times 8 is 24. And then -6 times -2 is positive 12. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that simple arithmetic and get -17 minus 27, 46, and 36. Okay. Now, here's something that might help you out a little bit, right? I'm going to take the first row on the first column, right? So, and that gives me element 1, 1, right? First row, second column gives me element 1, 2. Second row, first column gives me element 2, 1. Second row, second column gives me element 2, 2. Okay, so the element is just something we do to say, hey, that's the first row, first column, first row, second column, second row, first column, second row, second column, right? It's just a way to name what location each element is. And so a good way to remember that when I multiply, I do the row times the column. And the important thing to know is the number of elements in the row has to match the number of elements in the column. Okay? All right, so now let's look at our next example here. We're going to notice that I have two matrices that don't look the same, right? But before we had a 2 by 2, so that was pretty easy. Now it looks a little different, looks a little weird. So let's just follow our rules, right? I'm going to write the dimensions down, which is a 2 by 3 and a 3 by 2. So look at the two numbers here. I have 3 columns and 3 rows, so guess what? They match. That means I can multiply these two matrices together. Another thing that will make this easier is I'm going to take the two outside numbers, or the rows and columns, and get a 2 by 2. That tells me what my new matrix is going to be. Okay, now let's work our way through the multiplication process. So I'm going to take the first row, take the elements in that row, multiply to the elements of the first column. Okay, so here's what that's going to look like. I have 1 times -3 is -3, 4 times 5 is plus 20, and then -1 times 2 is -2. All right, then in my next spot, I'm going to take the same row, multiply it to the second column. I have 1 times -1 is -1, 4 times 3 is 12, and then I have -1 times 4, which is -4. Okay, moving on to the second row, first column, you're going to get 6 plus 25 minus 8. And then finally, the second row and the second column is going to give you positive 2 plus 15 minus 16. Okay, now I'm going to do all of my arithmetic, and I'm going to figure out that I get 15, 23, 7, and 1. Okay, all right, now let's look at one more example here. Okay, so now I have two matrices that look the same. They're both a 3 by 2 and a 3 by 2. But look at the number of columns and the number of rows. They don't match. So this means I cannot perform that operation, right? If we look at it even closer, I take the numbers in the first row, multiply it to the numbers in the first column. If you'll notice, 2 goes to negative 3 goes to 5, but what number multiplies that 2? And the answer is, since I don't have another number, I cannot perform the operation. So your answer here is cannot perform operation. All right, so it's very important when I multiply matrices together, I'm looking at the dimensions and decide, does my columns from the first one match the rows in my second one? If so, I can multiply it. And then I'm going to use those outside two numbers, or the rows from the first one, columns from the second one. That is going to give you my new dimensions, right? So when you talk about rows and columns and rows, it gets a little confusing. So the best thing for you to do is to go ahead and write it out. I have 2 by 3 and 3 by 2. From here, it's a very quick visual check of, all right, so I've got 3 by 3, so yes, I can multiply them together. And now the 2 and the 2 give me my new dimensions as down here, okay? So do yourself a favor, write it out before you determine whether that's something you can or can't do. All right, hope this video helps, and we'll see you in the next one.